Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'll call the SMUD Board meeting of directors of August 20th, 2015 to order. Please join me for the pledge to the flag.
We see all those things on TV with the massive amounts of, wildlife, migrating and so forth. Well, that's in their country.
This time we give our customers an opportunity to speak on matters on the agenda. I have received a couple of cards on this. Mr. Eric Windheim wishes to speak on the consent calendar. At this time, I'd like to remind speakers that they are addressing items on the agenda and that it's important to stay on the topic. If you stray off topic, of course, we'll ask you to reserve your comments for a later point in the agenda. Thank you. Welcome, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Director Kerth. My name is Eric Windheim. I'm the Director of Sacramento Smart Meter Awareness and Electromagnetic Radiation Specialist certified by the International Institute of Building and Biology. I'd like to speak about the approval of SD5. I think it's premature to approve something when people are not being treated with full respect and dignity. And I think that we should clear up some issues about concealment and deception that need correction. I'm speaking specifically about corrections where hundreds of thousands of brochures were given to SMUD customers.
Mr. Windheim, I'm sorry. I need to ask that you reserve these types of comments for additions to the monitoring report to a later point in the agenda. This is specifically about the monitoring report.
For number 7, item 7?
Yeah, item 7 is the monitoring report. So which point of the monitoring report would you like to discuss?
Well, the part about SD5.
Yeah, so what you want to propose here is an expansion or a change to what's monitored and what's reported on. That's not what's on the agenda at this time. This is an acceptance of the monitoring report.
Okay. So
you also indicated item number 10. Was there something on that?
Well,
that was the strategic direction, the monitoring report on safety.
Yeah, I don't think it should be approved because I don't see any tracking or reporting of injuries to the public related to smart meters as required by point B.
Okay, that also is really a separate issue that should be brought up later on the agenda.
Oh, on the agenda later?
No,
or in public comments?
On the agenda, on public comments for items not on the agenda.
I see.
Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much. Next up, we have Mr. Graham, who wishes to speak on the same two items. For those, so Mr. Graham, did that make sense? Really, you need to confine your comments to the monitoring report. Not changes, additions, proposals, things that you think that it should measure, but just simply the monitoring report that was presented.
And I can address what's incomplete if I say it's incomplete.
No, I'm sorry, no. That would come later in the agenda, and I'd ask you to reserve your comments for that point in the agenda.
The board has a decision to make, and it's whether to accept or not accept the monitoring report.
That's right. And
now, if the monitoring report is incomplete,
excuse me, sir, we've established the criteria at a different time for the monitoring report. The report simply talks to those criteria. If you want to talk about those criteria, that's not what's on the agenda at this time.
No, I'm not talking about the criteria. I'm talking about why it's complete or incomplete, and therefore why the board should accept or not accept it today.
Okay, so what's not in it? Or how did it not answer the criteria that was given?
I will appreciate if you would just give me the benefit of 3 minutes, and then you can address it in any manner, and so can all the directors. All right. My name is Mark Graham. I live in Elk Grove. I appreciate the opportunity to exercise my right to speak to this board. Now, SD5 in customer relations says maintaining a high level of customer relations is a core value of SMUD. This is in the board information packet on pages 353 to 362. As part of this policy, A, SMUD customers shall be treated in a respectful, dignified, and civil manner. And B is the part that I'm not going to address right now. All right. Now, I basically agree with what Mr. Windheim said. The monitoring report that has been presented for the board's acceptance is incomplete, and for that reason, I'm recommending against accepting the monitoring report. Hold on.
Sir, no.
I'm not the only director
Sir,
up there.
please.
I'm speaking to all 7
Let's
directors, and the
not-
other 6 directors
Let's
want
not
to
have a
hear what I'm
repeat.
saying tonight.
Let's not have a repeat of last week.
The other
okay?
6 directors want to
We
hear
have
what I'm saying
adopted the
tonight.
criteria for the monitoring reports at other times.
No, I'm not talking about the
Now is
criteria.
not
I'm
the
talking about
time-
why it's incomplete.
Now is not the time to talk
Yes, it
about
is. It
additions
is.
that should be made to
It
the
is.
monitoring
It is the
report or
time.
changes.
This is directly on this agenda item.
Sir,
This is directly
I'm
on
going to
this agenda
overrule
item.
you on this and ask you to please sit down and reserve your comments.
You are out of
later in
line.
the-
I have a right to speak to this board for 3 minutes on this
Now,
issue.
please, sir, enough is enough. You need to sit down now and wait until your proper time on the agenda.
President Kerth, I'd kind of like to get our council's opinion on this.
I think we can circle back to that later, please. Okay? It's very
Well,
precisely.
No, I
I actually would agree with Director Tamayo, and I'd be interested in hearing our council's opinion on whether or not this is appropriate comment on this item.
Under our procedures and under the Brown Act, the public does have a right to comment on items on the agenda, including the consent calendar. Our procedures provide that the consent calendar is treated as a single item. In this case, on the monitoring reports, the public has a right to express their opinion as to why or why not the board should or should not accept the monitoring report. But the comments do need to focus on the reasons why or why not, and not expand beyond the specific item at hand.
Okay, thank you. And so I believe that's the interpretation that I was making. And so they're expanding the criteria for the monitoring report, and that's not what is before us.
The public does have a right to comment on whether the board should adopt or not adopt the monitoring report
That's
and the
true.
reasons for that decision.
and my apologies to President Kerth, but it seems to me that if a member of the public is offering reasons as to why we shouldn't accept the monitoring report, to me, I think that there's a strong enough nexus in it, and actually, it sounds to me like you're saying that they should be able to speak to the points they were speaking to. That's actually what I'd like to know, is whether, in your opinion, that they should be able to speak to the points that they were attempting to raise.
If he limits his comments to accepting or not accepting the monitoring report, the public does have a right to speak. And so, in my opinion, he would be allowed 3 minutes, as long as he, again, focuses the comments on why or why not he believes that the board's not in compliance with the policy, or that the SMUD is not in compliance with the policy. So in this case, I think it would be appropriate to let him finish his 3 minutes, and Mr. One Time as well, and then the board can make their decision through the vote, by voting.
Could I just ask so I can clarify, I just want to make sure I'm clear on what you just said. So if the reason given for believing that we should not accept it is that something is missing, are they able to point out within their time limit what is missing as their reason for us not, their recommendation that we not approve it?
You should be able to point to something in the policy where the board has directed staff to ensure that certain things are done. And the purpose of the report is for staff to show the board that the policy has been complied with. So if you can point to something in the report to demonstrate that SMUD's not in compliance with the report and contradict what's in the actual monitoring report where the staff has recommended that the board find compliance, then then the public's allowed to do that. And I think in this case, out of an abundance of caution, I think that it would be just prudent to let the public have 3 minutes, as long as they stay within those constraints and don't go stray too far off topic. So it's got to be continually linked back to what's in the monitoring report, and the reasons as to why they feel that SMUD is not in compliance based on the criteria laid out in the policies adopted by the board, to which they are monitoring.
Okay. Other comments or thoughts? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'll comment. I think we're walking a very fine line here. And I think this board has been extremely generous with these speakers, with allowing them 3 minutes for the most part in a very respectful way for a couple of years now. They're now trying to express their opinion on the same topic through a different means. But I think as a board, we have to be pretty respectful of their rights under the law to comment on what they want to comment on. And I would be concerned with us being too strict in not allowing people that right unless they're really clearly straying way off topic. I think that we start crossing a line here. We're elected, and the law says what the public has a right to comment on, and I would be concerned if we drift to a point where we are overly restricting the public's right to comment. So it puts the burden on the president to really try to walk that fine line as when they've drifted too far, but until they've clearly drifted too far, it would be my preference that we follow as much as possible the open meeting laws and allow the public to speak to us when they have something to say.
President Kerth, just very briefly, in this particular instance, I felt that there was a strong enough nexus, and that's why, I asked for that opinion and, respectfully, request that we err on the side of allowing the public to speak. And frankly, I actually don't think it's erring. I actually think that there's a good nexus in this case. I would caution that there's plenty. We've heard plenty of testimony on this whole other subject, and I'm not interested in this opening up the door to stretching and sort of making up reasons to speak on other items. But on this particular instance, I do think that it's appropriate to let them speak. So thank you very much. So.
Mr. Slayton?
Yeah, I think that this is an important issue. I'm glad we're having this conversation because it's really important. There may be things we don't agree with or believe we've heard ad infinitum over the last 2 years. But the fact is we do have this public responsibility. And I think where this falls, if you actually look at our policy, there's a public safety item B. And item B says implement measures to protect the public from injuries related to SMUD operations or facilities. And I think that goes to the heart of their argument. I don't agree with the argument, but it is an argument. And so to me, being able to comment, does the report meet item B? And they may have an opinion about that, and I think it's reasonable to hear that, even though I think clearly this board doesn't agree with that, but that's an opinion. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Director Shroma.
Yes, so I agree with our colleagues' comments on this. Now, I would say that President Kerth, you have a very tough job as the president of the board because you are having to pay attention to everyone, everything, speakers, so forth, take a pulse, and you also have to be sergeant of arms as well in running an efficient meeting. So I appreciate that you were striving to be very precise, that here's what the policy says. Are we in compliance or not? That's what we're voting on. But in the meantime, having been in the other shoes, having spent till 1 o'clock in the morning down at City Council on an issue that didn't go my way, but hanging in there to get my 2 minutes of comments in there, I think it's an important part of our governance process. So I want you to know, I respect that you are trying to run an efficient meeting, but in the meantime, I think we need to allow both speakers to come back up and finish their 3 minutes.
Okay. Anything else?
Real quickly, I think Director Taylor put it very well. I think Mr. Windheim and Mr. Graham have found what amounts to a loophole to expand their 3 minutes into some larger territory. And I think as dubious as I personally find their arguments, it's a loophole. And it's another 3 minutes. So
Okay.
there we go.
Well, I won't call for a vote on this. I will agree to change it willingly, but a couple of things. These meetings are governed by rules, and they are very clearly defined to protect the rights of folks who are served by SMUD, members of the public, to protect the rights of the staff, to protect the people who are here and not here. And it's important to remember that these meetings do cost money, that the staff people that we have sitting here are all costing us money, and that has, even though occasionally a small point, a rate impact. And so by bending rules to allow sort of dubious connections to items that are on the agenda, we've decided to take something away from other people who aren't here to defend themselves tonight. It's very important that items that are on the agenda, that we have the speakers speak strictly to the item that's on the agenda, and that it not be used as a pretext to fly off onto other things or to make, really tenuous and dubious connections to sort of unrelated issues. I think we all know of different boards in this vicinity where rather than having a consent calendar with a handful of items, it may be a consent calendar with 40 or 50 items. And each one of those has now acquired 5 or 6 speakers who will speak on each and every one of them simply with the pretext of saying that, well, I don't think this item is proper. You should instead have done this other thing. And it can lengthen meetings to where, quite frankly, they regularly go past midnight just to try and finish an otherwise ordinary agenda. And so it's very important with these items that people speak to the item, that they not use it as a pretense. Now, one other issue in the Brown Act, it gives people the right to talk. It does not give them the right to repeat themselves. And so issues that are raised during the consent calendar on items on the consent calendar really don't get repeated then later on the agenda. And so to the extent that I, if history is a predictor of this, think that we might hear a little bit more about smart meters tonight, that would be a repetition. And so to the safety of smart meters, the health effects of smart meters, all the things that we're going to hear again, there is at a point on the agenda for that. There is in the law the reason that we are not supposed to have to listen to that again, have to listen to testimony that repeats itself. There are some jurisdictions that say that, frankly, testimony in 1 week probably means you can't speak to that issue again for at least another month or 2, that they consider that to be repetition, and they've been supported in that. And so, we are very generous with this. We encourage people to come to speak on items both on the agenda and off the agenda, but there are rules that apply to these privileges, and that those privileges need to be followed. Okay, with that, Mr. Windheim, welcome back for 3 more minutes. I apologize for cutting you off.
That's okay. I like to see the way government process works. Thank you. Okay, I'm speaking specifically to the many pages of the report on Strategic Directive 6. I have the staffing summary sheet, and I've been noticing for the last 3 years that there's never been any mention about public that has been injured by facilities on private property, such as microwave relay stations, also known as smart meters. So I'm wondering, because like I see this wonderful chart on the back of the report here, it says electrical contact, hit object, car pole, electrical contact, every possible injury, and I've even seen soft tissue injuries and other acceptance of the strategic directive safety reports. Never been any injury from these new, experimental devices placed on private property, which is a SMUD facility located on private property with a specific easement. So I think it would be a good idea. I'm going to make a public records request act for the report of injuries from smart meters since the inception of the program in September of 2009, I believe. And I know that there's been at least 24 sworn declarations submitted here, because this is the result of a previous Public Records Act request. And there's been dozens of other people that just came in here and complained. So once again, I'd like to, I think that's important. It says here on point A, under purpose, track and report injuries to the public related to SMUD operations and facilities. And it doesn't say what type of injuries, it just says injuries, period. That's a universally open set. So I think that this monitoring report is complete. It's time to realize that. And we have to address the issue of what new SMUD technologies are doing to people. So I would like to have the PRA for the report of those injuries today. And I'm suggesting that if you sign this, we better plan on including those the next time around, because we've made it very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. I suspect when I was looking at it, I thought they were included.
Beg your pardon, sir?
No, Mr. Windheim, please. Thank you. Mr. Graham?
What did you say?
They are included, to my understanding.
What, the injuries from smart meters?
That's right.
In the report?
That's right.
Where?
Excuse me. Have a seat. There are none that we know of. Thank you.
Okay. May I comment, President Kerth?
Please.
Okay, I was going to wait till after.
No, actually.
So should I wait until after?
Just wait.
Okay.
President Kerth, before I begin, a clarification about the time. I submitted a comment card for Agenda Item 7 and a different one for Agenda Item 10. I was under the understanding that I would receive 3 minutes for each, and that's per board policy. General Counsel Lewis, would you clarify that, please?
Actually, if I could clarify that, first off, I'd like to apologize for cutting you off earlier and welcome you back to the podium. Sorry for the confusion there on my part. You have 3 minutes to speak on the consent calendar, as the entire consent calendar is one item.
Okay.
Okay?
Then I should do that. I'm going to start with Agenda Item 7, which is where I left off. My name is Mark Graham, and I live in Elk Grove. As I said, part of this policy, SMUD customers shall be treated in a respectful, dignified, and civil manner. I'll come back to that in a second. I just want to thank this board for what you just did. You had what I consider an extremely important decision to make about public participation in the SMUD Board of Directors meetings, and I thank you. You made the right decision. I want to thank Director Slayton, Director Tamayo, and Director Shiroma for your comments and everything, Director Fishman and Director Taylor for your conclusion, but not your reasons. It is not a loophole. Board policy SD6 is not a loophole. SD5 is not a loophole. The United States Constitution and the California Constitution are not loopholes either. Anyway, that was the best thing I've seen in any board meeting that I've been to, period. That little cooperation where you ended up doing the right thing and honoring the citizens' right to speak, and I thank you for that, each one of you who spoke up, as I said, and thank you, General Counsel Lewis, for your advice to the board. All right. Anyway, in my opinion, aside from treating customers in a respectful and dignified manner, it has to start with respecting the customer's right to free speech at the board meeting. So I hope that this will not be an issue in the future, but absolutely trying to cut off my comments and Mr. Windheim's comments is not treating me. It's not treating Mr. Windheim in a respectful, dignified, and civil manner. And beyond that, when you place a smart meter on the person's house without their consent, you lie to the customer about its safety and health effects, you conceal the opt-out program, and you refuse to take it off their home because they live in an apartment, that is also not treating customers in a respectful, dignified, and civil manner. Now, speaking of agenda item 10, this is SD6 on safety. I echo Mr. Windheim's comments. It says track and report injuries to the public related to SMUD operations or facilities. I know that there have been injuries from smart meters, and you know that too. They may not be in the report. They're not in the report, and that's why I'm advising and recommending to this board to not accept the monitoring report, because it's incomplete, and that's why it's incomplete. The injuries to your customers from smart meters, which you've heard about firsthand in person from some of your customers, should be in that report, and they're not. It also says, public safety, this is part B, implement measures to protect the public from injuries related to SMUD operations or facilities. Well, we've been recommending it for months. The measure that you could implement to protect the public from injuries related to SMUD smart meters is simply notify their customers fully, thoroughly, and repeatedly about the opt-out program and the analog meter option. It's a direct nexus. It's a direct connection to SD6, agenda item 10, found in the board packet today on pages 386 through 394. I will comment on other items later. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the public comment on the consent calendar. So, is there anyone who would like to speak to the consent calendar?
So I'm prepared to make the motion to approve the consent calendar. In doing so, I want to once again emphasize that there is a disagreement. Okay? SMUD uses best practices. Why do we not include smart meter injuries, what have you? It is because the causal connection is not there. And we are relying on experts from the FCC and so forth on this. It all comes back to best practices being used within the utility industry on a long time use of the smart meters. So anyways, I make the motion.
Okay, we have a
Second.
motion and a motion Sharoma, second Bowie Thompson. Anyone like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, well, I think it's to the motion.
Okay. I'm a bulldog on this. Watch out.
I know. Well, I'm just reiterating a little bit or emphasizing a point that Director Sharoma made, is that the injuries we are tracking and reporting are those that we are convinced were actually a result of our operations and facilities. And although people have made declarations and presented information, we do not have information that would tie those particular statements directly to our operations or facilities, and therefore that's why they're not included. And so I'll be voting for the motion.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Tamayo.
Well, yeah, I would actually like to ask of staff or council, the report actually does include, and in fact, we include claims of injury, and we don't make judgment as to, there's a subsequent step as to where we make a judgment as to whether it's a valid claim or not. And from the claims that there were a couple that you provided that seemed, totally specious, but they were included in the claims. So is there a reason that if the types of claims that they're talking about should not be included into that? And
so the claims that we track are claims that are where there is a formal claim filed against SMUD. Comments made in a public meeting that do not trigger a Tort Claims Act or the Government Tort Claims Act, we don't include. So it is where a customer has, or any member of the public has filed a formal claim, usually seeking some sort of reimbursement or whatever for the injury they've received. So we do not track, for example, if somebody called up and said, I tripped over your wire, but don't worry about it. I'm just calling you to tell you about it. but I'm not going to do anything about it. You know, so we track those things where a claim has formally been filed. In these cases, these are information that we've been provided by customers coming to this meeting, but they have not filed a formal claim at SMUD. So if they were to file formal Tort Claims Act claims, we would include it in the report. The report, again, as you will recall, is just tracking whether they were filed or not. It does not, at this point, make a judgment as to whether they are valid or not, but the information about those tort claims would be included in the report.
Okay, does that answer your question? Okay, so we can get back to the motion. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further comment on the motion? Thanks. If none, please vote.
The consent calendar is approved with Directors Taylor, Fishman, Bowie Thompson, Sharoma, Tamayo, Slayton, and President Kerth voting yes.
Okay, next up is item 11A, to approve the revisions to the strategic direction 1A, the purpose statement. I believe there is time for board discussion on this. Director Slayton?
I would just introduce a motion to get it on the table to approve SD1A as submitted by the ad hoc.
Okay, we have
By the committee, actually.
Motion Slayton, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second Fishman. Is there a further discussion on the motion? I have to admit, I was a little unsure that the community-owned seemed to flow very well in the statement, but I think Director Taylor's right. It belongs there. So with that,
Bingo. Yep.
directors, please vote.
I'm sorry, did we have a speaker card for?
Oh, this one.
Oh, I'm
For
sorry,
that?
yes, there's a speaker card for item 11.
Is this,
Mr. Graham?
Right, is this item 11?
well, item 11, I'm sorry, isn't this the only,
Yeah, the discussion calendar 11.
Okay.
it's 11A and B.
That is what we just voted on, so I guess we could take testimony.
Well, before the board acts, he's allowed to speak on
Okay.
the discussion
You wanna
calendar.
Clear the vote thing?
Well, we can
Oh, yeah, we can go.
We can always bring it up for rescind the previous vote if we need to. Thanks. Mr. Graham, please go ahead.
Are you voting separately on SD1A and SD1B, or are you voting on them together?
Separately.
Separately. All right, then, all right, because they were lumped similarly. On SD1A, I think that the original, well, the previous board policy, which said our purpose is to provide solutions for meeting our customers' electrical energy needs, was perfectly adequate. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with it. That really is the purpose of SMUD. The proposed revision is to enhance the quality of life for our customers and community through creative energy solutions. I don't know, it sounds woo-woo to me. It sounds like you want your customers to feel good. And of course, I want the customers to feel good, but that's not really the mission of SMUD. That's not why you're here. SMUD exists to provide electricity safely, essentially. So I think this is really a stretch. Enhance the quality of life for our customers and community through creative energy solutions. I don't agree with the proposed revision. I think the previous version was just fine. I recommend against this proposed change to SD1A. Thank you.
Thanks. While you're up, would you care to speak to item 11B too?
I'll be glad to.
Please. Thank you.
All right, 3 minutes, correct?
Go ahead.
Reset. Thank you. All right,
No, wait, I'm sorry. It's one item, so it's 3 minutes total.
we are having two
Yeah,
votes.
But there's two
two
separate
votes?
votes on it.
Two separate
Okay.
votes.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. My name is Mark Graham. I live in Elk Grove. You know that, but I say that again for the tape. SMUD Board Policy Vision Statement, policy number SD1B. You have some proposed revisions here. There's nothing really wrong, in my opinion, with the wording that's been proposed as a change, but I think that you've crossed out some things that were really good and do belong in the vision statement. And let me identify those for you. It says, in implementing this vision, SMUD will adhere to these principles. A, preserve our customers' quality of life by offering flexibility and options. That is great. You should keep that, in my opinion. B, I think you should keep two, enable customers to use both active and passive means to achieve these goals. I don't see anything wrong with it. When I read this by offering flexibility and options, the first thing that comes to my mind is the opt-out program. That's an option, and that's flexibility that you make available to some customers, but only if they live in a single-family house. I think you should keep A and B. Part C, enable all customers to participate. That is excellent. That is excellent. To me, when I think of a municipal utility district, it's you're each elected, you're here doing the business for the public and on behalf of the public. You're not trying to earn a profit by the end of the next quarter for the investors, because you don't have investors. And when you say enable all customers to participate, that is excellent, and that belongs in there. I don't think you should take it out. Part D, collaborate as appropriate with partners. I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't see any benefit to taking it out. Part E, I have no problem with Part E. I think you should keep it. Now, Part F is another one that I really like from the existing policy. Part F, use a comprehensive communication strategy. A comprehensive communication strategy, what is that? I don't really know what that is. That could mean different things. It could mean, for example, that when the board adopts a new policy that says customers that don't want to have a smart meter on their house have the right to have it removed and replaced with a safe, reliable analog electric meter, they have the right to do so. That would be comprehensive communication strategy. But it could include 1,000 other things as well. Last December, SMUD emailed 250,000 of your customer accounts to inform them that there was a storm coming up. And Mr. Orchard mentioned that at a board meeting. Maybe that's part of your comprehensive communication strategy. I think a comprehensive communication strategy is excellent, and it's a really important part of being a municipal utility district. Part G, leverage SMUD's leadership role to achieve these goals. I don't see anything wrong with that. I think you should keep it in there. So I recommend against these proposed changes to the vision statement policy SD1B. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fishman, would you like to make a presentation on the vision statement?
Well, only to say that, and maybe this is what Director Slayton was going to comment on also, but.
Well, I'd like to get the purpose statement out of the way.
I was going to.
Well, but we need to vote after the
No, actually,
comment.
let me, wait, hold on, let me run the meeting. No, is there a motion to rescind the previous vote based on the testimony that we have received?
I think the board needs to vote again after the public comment, formally do another vote.
Okay.
So I'd make the motion.
We actually have to have a motion to rescind the previous vote then. We can't just pretend it didn't happen.
It was procedurally taken out of order.
Okay, I'll make the motion to rescind the previous vote.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion Sharoma, second Slayton. Directors, please vote.
The motion to rescind the vote is approved with Directors Taylor, Fishman, Bowie Thompson, Jerome Tamayo, Slayton, and President Kerth voting yes.
Okay, now is there a motion?
I move we accept SD1A as drafted.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion Slayton, second Bowie Thompson. Directors, please vote.
The motion to approve the revisions to SD1A is approved with Directors Taylor, Fishman, Bowie Thompson, Sharoma, Tamayo, Slayton, and President Kerth voting yes.
So the next.
Mr. Fishman.
So let me just address a couple of points in the vision statement. First of all,
Could I make just one comment on the things that we're talking about eliminating? Part of the discussion on those were things that are already covered in other policies, so it was the redundancy part of it. It didn't mean that there's not the same emphasis on it in the organization, but they're done with much more particularity in the SDs.
Yeah, I understand that. And in fact, I would agree. It's been a while since I really studied the language in this policy. I would agree that, yes, these things are much better articulated in the policies that are specific as opposed to these brief summaries. And I think the committee did a good job in reworking this policy and clarifying it. So I'm supportive.
Other comments, questions? No, hearing none. Do we have a
Move SD1B.
Motion Slayton, second Bowie Thompson. And I just want to comment on it that, of course, support the motion and believe in the changes here, but that none of the enumerated items are going away. They are still very key to everything that SMUD does and everything that this organization is about. They're just being talked about in a different place with greater detail. And so with that, directors, please vote.
The revisions to SD1B are approved with Directors Taylor, Fishman, Bowie Thompson, Sharoma, Tamayo, Slayton, and President Kerth voting yes.
Okay, so that was items 11A and 11B. At this time, we're at statements from the public. This time, we give our customers an opportunity to speak on items not on the agenda on which the board will take no action, and items not on the agenda but within our jurisdiction. Please speak into the microphone at the podium. State your name for the record. Please do not move the microphone as it is designed to pick up your voice at a distance. Please remember to direct your comments to the board. If you have written materials you wish to provide to the board, please hand them to the security officer to distribute. Also, since your matter has not been placed on the agenda, the board may not engage in an active discussion of the matter and is limited briefly to responding to statements, clarifying questions, and directing staff to follow up on the matter. I have received, I have two, I believe. Mr. Graham, you checked, or I'm sorry, Mr. Windheim, you checked several boxes, Mr. Windheim. Did you also want to speak at this time?
Just about public comment relating to this document that I supplied all of you.
Okay, please come forward.
Okay, before I get into this peer-reviewed report about smart meters, I wanted to talk about legal loopholes. Mr. Orchard says that only tort claims are considered injuries. I guess that's a legal definition. So why was there never any mention of this over the last 3 years to these people's lives that have been devastated by smart meters who could barely operate a phone to call a lawyer or find out the gymnastics required to properly file and be considered to be injured by Mr. Orchard? I think this is a legal loophole here. And I guess it means that if you go through the hoops and you do everything the way SMUD wants it, it's not considered an injury. Kind of like Planned Parenthood doesn't consider an aborted fetus a child. So with that said, I want to move on to why I originally came here tonight. This is a self-reporting of symptom development from exposure to radio frequency fields of wireless smart meters in Victoria, Australia. This is a peer-reviewed report. I have written permission from Federica Lemecq, medical practitioner, to present this to you. There'll be more of these too. There'll be more specifically about smart meters. And I think it'd be good to become acquainted. I took the time to print it all up for you. And what I want to do is work right back to the back of the second page, which is actually page 4. And you see page 5 has this huge list of symptoms, okay? There's a huge list of symptoms that people are reporting from smart meters. And she grouped them into 5 symptomology categories because she's a medical professional. And the 5 most common symptoms that people report when they're exposed to this biologically experimental microwave radiation is insomnia, number 1, headaches, number 2, tinnitus, number 3, lethargy, number 4, and cognitive disturbance, number 5. Now, just like SMUD did, Australia mandated the rollout of smart meters throughout Victoria, which effectively removed the whole population's ability to avoid exposure. And it destroyed any possibility of a control group. The interesting fact on the front page is that the vast majority of these Victorian cases do not state that they had any type of electromagnetic hypersensitivity before the smart meter. That points out the possibility that the smart meters have unique characteristics, frequencies, waveforms, that lower people's thresholds so they become symptomatic to all things electric. We'll come back to this later, but I want to respect the clock, hang on to this copy. It's a peer-reviewed report. There'll be many others. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up, Mr. Graham.
Hello again. My name is Mark Graham. I live in Elk Grove. A few items I wanted to address. First, I just want to come back to this policy that Mr. Orchard said we're only tracking the injuries that are on where the customer files a claim through the Government Tort Claims Act. Now, that may be what you're tracking. That's not what the policy said. You really need to read it again closely. It says track and report injuries to the public related to SMUD operations or facilities. It's not further qualified. Ask your attorneys. The way something like that is interpreted is according to the plain language. And plain language does not say that the customer has to file a Government Claims Act or a government tort thing. So please revisit that. Now, at the previous meeting, I hand-delivered a copy of this packet for every director. 5 of you were here, 2 of you were not. I encourage you to read the whole thing. I'm not going to go through it all again, but this is abundant science, peer-reviewed scientific evidence that wireless radiation, microwave radiation, radio frequency radiation, such as smart meters produce, causes biological effects. I'm not making this up. The California Medical Association, which represents 40,000 California doctors, passed a resolution on December 7th, 2014 that said so, and there were 62 footnotes. My colleagues and I have been talking to you about the Bioinitiative 2012 report for the longest time. I don't know, I've been talking to you about it for a year and a half. Anyway, there's wonderful, useful information in here. Once you read it, you will be well informed on the issue. Please take a look. Now, Greg Fishman, at a meeting in June, you made a comment that you were quoting the CCST report, California Council on Science and Technology. Shortly after that, I sent to you and all the directors my critique of the CCST report, and I attached, which included quotations from others, and I attached a critique of that same report by Joel Hirsch, another one from Dr. Magda Havas, and another one from Carl Murray. I would appreciate your response at the end of public comments tonight to all those critiques, and also a response from any board member, and hopefully that you've read it. Now, I was looking through old emails, and I found that I sent you one on May 20th of this year with 14 attachments, and as I read it, I thought, this is still applicable. This email that I sent the directors on May 20th with 14 attachments is still applicable because the board has not made progress on any of those things. So I sent it to you again. You should have received it from Ms. Lesh. I'm just asking you to review these things so you will be knowledgeable about the subject. Also, I wrote something for you. It's called the Federal Communications Commission and Wireless Radiation. I delivered that to Ms. Lesh. Each of the directors should have received it, and please take a look at it. There's one thing I want to read. Which you should, anyway, the FCC said in 1999 that further research was needed on non-thermal effects. There's been a lot of research on non-thermal effects since 1999. And last thing, President Kerth, you said earlier in the meeting that you are baffled. You are baffled by some of the rules that we have in place for governing public meetings. I recommend strongly that you get with your counsel, Mr. Orchard, Ms. Lewis, both very capable, and study the Ralph M. Brown Act. It will clarify all
Mr.
that
Graham,
for you.
Your time is up, and you've taken my comments out of context.
No, I didn't. Well, study the Brown Act, and you'll know how to lead meetings.
Folks, hold on a sec here.
Correctly.
Now, I want to point out that without asking you, and I apologize for that, I should have done that. We allowed Mr. Graham 12 minutes at this meeting, and technically the board rules say that he can only have 9 minutes per meeting. So I wanted to extend him that extra courtesy and make sure that given the tenor of the evening, we enjoyed all the public testimony we could. Now, Mr. Slayton, you look like you're eager to say something.
Well, I just, one of the comments that was made regarding the policy that we did regarding safety and about the injuries. And I want to make sure that the people speaking and those who are watching understand that our policy governance process is based on us writing a policy, and the CEO interprets that policy. And then we decide whether we're satisfied or not with that interpretation. But the interpretation of policy is a function of the CEO, and then we react to that and decide whether we like that interpretation or whether we need to change the words or not. And so far, we'll see, but so far, we have been pleased with the interpretation of our policy. So, thank you.
Director Slayton, thank you. Other questions or comments from the board members? I'm sorry, Director Tamayo.
I just wanted to point out that, a couple of the members, of the public referred to I think it was actually specifically Mr. Graham. You referred to our commitment to treating people civilly. And part of our problem here is that we can't require the public to do the same to us. And I'd say that both of you tonight have and frankly, I think that you provided some interesting comments on our vision, and I appreciate your concern about removing things. And there was points where it's like, wow, these guys are being pretty civil. But there was one comment that Mr. Windheim made that was far from civil. It was actually an unnecessary reference to an outside issue, and to say, I think that you abandon civility in that. And then I'd also like to say that I would appreciate if Mr. Graham would exercise civility in how you speak to us. I think that the months that I've been here, you stray from civility frequently, and I think that that's a big part of it. Doesn't add to your argument. Being strident and rude and disrespectful to us in the things that you say that we're trying to do are very far from being respectful. Now, I agree that you have an absolute right to question our policies, and you have no actual legal obligation to be nice to us, but we don't appreciate it. And if you want us to and we have a commitment to being civil to our customers and to the public at large, and I respectfully request that you look at your own behavior and try to reciprocate that. Thank you.
Mr. Graham, sit down. Mr. Graham, sit down. Mr. Graham, sit down now. Thank you.
Okay. Look.
Okay.
I'm going
to give you the floor in just one moment.
Okay,
I remember my father's advice. Thank you. Go ahead.
What was your father's advice?
Well, I think I will tell it to you later. But you've heard it before, and when I say it, you will remember it.
Well, right now, I think I'm just, okay, look. I am proud to support Planned Parenthood. I think the stuff that's going on against Planned Parenthood is horribly political. The New England Journal of Medicine defended Planned Parenthood, and I'll end it there. Okay.
Okay.
Because of your father's advice.
Well, thank you for saying that. I agree with you on that point completely. Now, is there anything else to come before the board at this time? Well, I would like to take a moment then just to remind everyone that worries about smart meters are both unfounded and completely unnecessary. Any efforts or investments made to avoid smart meters are entirely wasted. I know that change can be unnerving, especially when it comes quickly, but giving in to hysteria and falling victim to the alarmists and the charlatans of our era will not improve anyone's lives. Ladies and gentlemen, good night. We are adjourned.
And an issue that has been highlighted recently because of the drought is that we need to save our trees. So we do have to decrease our water usage, but there is, a sad issue with our trees dying, and we need to keep them alive. And so the idea is, save your water in that big Home Depot bucket. I think I bought ours for $5, the big orange bucket, and use the water, that 5-gallon bucket twice a week will save your trees. So I want to give a plug to all of our beautiful canopy of trees and our little part that we can do to help them through this horrible drought. So I'm not advocating Home Depot's buckets, but use a bucket, save your trees.
Thanks. It was fascinating meeting with the folks from Tanzania. Some of the rules that we have governing, how we do our processes here to them were baffling. I would have to say is probably the right word. The one that struck them the most was the fact that 4 board members really can't ever be together at the same time unless it's in a public meeting. And they just looked at us like, well, how do you folks get anything done with that rule? But we've grown used to it.
I was going to comment on the delegation from Tanzania. It's a result of SMUD's longstanding partnership with the U.S. Agency for International Development and the U.S. Energy Association. So we have a longstanding, I think now about nearly 20-year partnership with both those agencies to help with the development of energy infrastructure and policy in emerging nations. And Paul Lau has been very involved in that effort and has been to many countries to help them assist them in those. And I've been to Kenya as part of that process. So it's a great partnership.